The irony wasn't lost on me, that a man who'd spent his life encrypting the world's secrets would have his own legacy hacked while unconscious. That while my chest was being pried open in an operating room, my life was being surgically dismantled in boardrooms and legal filings. I didn't wake up to flowers. I woke up to silence. Cold, sterile silence. For more of these stories, please subscribe now for the coldest revenge stories where silence is strategy and survival is sabotage. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I'd planned to return to work by Friday. Doctors said the surgery was routine, a high risk, sure, but I was in good hands. I had prepared my estate. Left my wife as interim chair of Virelli Tech. She insisted, "Let me take care of things, Dom. Just focus on healing." She held my hand in pre-op like she was sending a soldier to war. Now I know she was tucking a grenade in my pocket before I stepped onto the battlefield. The room was dim when I came to. A monitor beeped steadily beside me. My chest felt like it had been sewn shut with barbed wire. I blinked into the overhead light, and something was wrong. It wasn't the pain, or the drugs. It was the absence. No Elena. No phone. No aide. Just a nurse scribbling notes and a clock that ticked too loud. I reached for the button and croaked. "Where's my wife?" The nurse looked puzzled. "She hasn't visited, sir. Your assistant said you requested no visitors." That was the first lie. I never made that request. I spent 2 more days in the hospital trying to piece together what I had missed. My phone had been lost during transport. My laptop was locked for your privacy. And the assistant I had trusted for 5 years? Gone. Quietly replaced by temporary support, none of whom would look me in the eye. On the 3rd day, I had a nurse wheel me to the TV lounge. I switched to a business news channel. And that's when I saw her. Elena. Standing behind a sleek, black podium under the Virelli Tech logo. Wearing power red. As the new acting CEO of Virelli Tech, I want to assure our stakeholders that the transition is not only seamless, but strategic. My heart monitor flatlined briefly, not because I was dying. Because in that moment, I realized she had planned this. The surgery wasn't an interruption. It was her opportunity. Virelli Tech was my life's work. A cybersecurity fortress now valued at $8.2 billion. We served defense contractors, financial institutions, and 5 governments. I had built it from a 3-person garage to a tower that scraped the skyline. Elena joined the company 6 years ago as a compliance analyst. Smart, poised, quick with a solution. We kept our relationship quiet until the merger was secure. Then came the wedding. Private, tailored, and now I understood strategic. She never needed me. She needed access. I discharged myself early. Returned to my penthouse. The elevator denied my keycard. My biometric scan failed. Security greeted me like a stranger. One guard, someone I hired personally, lowered his voice as I was turned away and whispered, "She said you weren't coming back." I smiled, because that confirmed everything. She hadn't just staged a coup. She buried me alive. My financial accounts were inaccessible. Frozen, pending executive verification. My emails rerouted. My name scrubbed from the internal directory. Even the foundation I'd set up in my late father's name, dismantled and reorganized under new philanthropic leadership. Her leadership. I sat in a rented town car, overlooking the building that bore my name, watching the world believe I'd simply walked away. That Dominic Virelli, the founder, the icon, had gone quietly into post-surgical retirement. I hadn't retired. I'd been erased. And that was her first mistake. Because she should have finished the job. I didn't rage. I didn't run to the press. I didn't storm the boardroom with declarations of fraud. That's the difference between men like me and the ones who lose everything. I know that revenge, like security, is best served encrypted, silent, precise, and invisible until the moment it detonates. I rented a furnished flat in Midtown under a corporate shell I'd dissolved 5 years ago. No press knew I was there. No lawyers. Not even the few friends who hadn't quietly taken her side. I went ghost. Publicly written off as recuperating abroad, while my name vanished from the Virelli Tech website like a footnote in someone else's biography. Good. That gave me space to think. And build. I started with the servers. Before my surgery, I'd given Elena partial access to our enterprise controls, but I kept one string for myself. An offline admin port hard-coded into Virelli Tech's root architecture. Buried so deep in the system's security protocol that even our best engineers thought it was decommissioned. They were wrong. I logged in from a cold laptop, air-gapped and stripped of all identifiers. The second I entered the shell, I was greeted by rows of silent, blinking logs. Meeting transcripts, location pings, file changes, internal emails, all time-stamped. And within those entries, the story of my erasure. 3 days after my anesthesia began, a meeting occurred in the executive suite, unrecorded officially, but captured by the blackline node in my private surveillance system. Elena, a compliance lawyer named Vernon, 2 board members. She called it a crisis succession conversation. She cited vague medical concerns. Dominic's lucidity is impaired, cognitive drift, psychosomatic breakdown. None of it was true, but none of them questioned it. She presented a resignation letter bearing my signature, not forged with a pen, but digitally mimicked, using a biometric overlay stolen from a system I created. They bought it, all of it, because they wanted to. I had spent years making Virelli Tech bulletproof. That's what they hated. Elena offered something easier, a softer version of the company, stripped of its harsh corners, its paranoia, its protocols. Something that played nice with government expansion and press releases. She wasn't their queen. She was their yes. And they crowned her the moment they thought I couldn't stand. I sat for hours watching video feeds of my own board meetings. In one clip, Vernon laughed as he said, "You're lucky he's not the type to hold grudges." Elena replied, "He won't hold anything. Not after this." And that's when I smiled. Because she had made the fatal assumption of every power thief. She thought legacy was about control, but legacy is about architecture. And she was sitting inside a fortress I built, not just with software and firewalls, but with secrets. I made 3 phone calls. One to a digital forensics expert who once hacked a foreign treasury. One to a former Black Ops specialist turned investigator. And one to Eleanor Hale, my old corporate counsel. The only person I ever trusted with my will. When I told her what had happened, she said nothing for 10 full seconds. Then she asked, "Are we reclaiming the company?" I said no. We're dismantling her life. And just like that, the counter-architecture began. I wouldn't just get my company back. I'd make it her cage. They hosted the gala exactly 1 month after I was discharged from the hospital. Black tie. 500 guests. $10, 000. A plate tribute to Virelli Tech's next era of innovation. Elena's name was printed across every invitation, beneath the new company tagline she personally authored. Tomorrow, secured. Tomorrow. Not built. Not earned. Just secured. They toasted her as the face of next-generation leadership. She gave interviews from a custom-built podium framed by LED screens playing highlight reels of our company's milestones, clips that deliberately cropped me out, recut with new narration that said nothing of my past. I stood in the shadows on the second-floor balcony, in a suit 2 seasons out of style, watching them clap for a woman who'd sold her soul for my signature. And I smiled. Because I wasn't there to crash the party. I was there to study the enemy. The event was live-streamed. We captured every word, every smile, every smirk, especially when Elena took the stage and said, "Dominic was the foundation. But foundations don't grow. They support what comes next." I'd have applauded her wordplay if it hadn't been a eulogy in disguise. They thought I was gone, weak, outclassed, but they didn't know I'd already inserted an algorithm into the live feed. A silent keylogger that captured every email, every backstage command, every burner login used by her and Vernon to coordinate press messaging. She thought she was controlling the narrative. In reality, she was adding citations to my evidence folder. I slipped out before dessert. On my way out, I paused at the table where my name had once been printed every year as founder and host. It now read, "Reserved for strategic advisors." An empty chair. Perfect. That night, back at the safe house, I sat with Eleanor and reviewed what we had collected, Surveillance footage of illegal board discussions timestamped transfers of company shares without proper authorization, communications between Elena and third-party vendors discussing asset shifting in anticipation of re-ownership restructuring. In plain terms, they were planning to sell the company, move the capital offshore, and vanish. And I would let them. Because halfway through a heist is the worst moment to call the police, but the best moment to spring a trap. 3 days after the gala, we filed a preliminary civil suit under a dormant clause in the Virelli Tech Articles of Incorporation, one that required unanimous board approval for any transfer of founder shares. The clause had been written years ago, buried under mountains of jargon, but binding. I hadn't signed, which meant every transaction since my surgery was potentially invalid. A judge issued a temporary freeze on major asset liquidation, just enough to stall her, not enough to warn her. And while she celebrated new product launches, I quietly flew to Zurich, where one of her dummy corporations had just completed a property acquisition using Virelli Tech funds. The bank manager remembered me, which was all I needed. I didn't walk into court with anger. I walked in with blueprints. Court filings are dry, impersonal. But when stacked high enough, they can bury a person alive. By the time we were ready to move, Elena didn't even know she was under siege. The civil suit we filed in Delaware Chancery Court, the quiet kind billionaires dread, cited breach of fiduciary duty, signature fraud, and unlawful asset transfer. But that was only the surface. We weren't after compensation. We were after a collapse. And we started with the spine of her empire, the shell companies. Over 6 weeks, I flew to Zurich, Malta, and the Cayman Islands. Not for vacation, for war. Her name didn't appear directly on anything, but her digital prints were all over the false corporations she and Vernum constructed. We traced company funds funneled through encrypted coin wallets into offshore real estate, dormant hedge accounts, and a yacht parked quietly in Portofino under a corporation called True Harbor Limited. The catch? True Harbor had one flaw. It used a compliance signature code created in my name, attached to an outdated Virelli Tech authorization token that only I ever possessed. She'd copied it. Badly. That single code gave us jurisdictional access to seize and audit any transaction made under the True Harbor umbrella. And we did. Publicly. We submitted it in open court as Exhibit A. A direct line between my digital fingerprint and her illegal acquisitions. Elena's lawyer filed a motion to suppress the evidence, claiming the founder token had been misused after my incapacitation. The judge's response? The founder was never incapacitated. He was deceived. From there, it unraveled like old rope. We filed a supplemental criminal referral to the Department of Justice, citing interstate fraud, misappropriation of protected intellectual property, and wire fraud through false asset disclosures. By then, the press had caught the scent. Business Insider ran a headline, CEO coup or corporate crime. Inside the collapse of Virelli Tech's power couple, Elena issued a public statement the next morning. I have nothing to hide. My husband and I are working through a private disagreement, but I had already released the Zurich surveillance footage. No audio. Just her, Vernum, and a contract exchange. Stamped. Dated. Documented. The board flipped within 3 days. 5 members voted to rescind her executive control. 2 resigned entirely. And Vernum? He vanished. His office cleared overnight. Passport flagged by Interpol under a new warrant from Swiss authorities tied to the illegal transaction string. Elena was alone. And worse, visible. The woman who erased me now had nowhere left to hide. All that remained was her wedding. The perfect ending. The wedding was meant to be her clean slate. A new name, a new husband, some financier with family roots in international equity markets. A merger of reputations disguised as romance. It was held on a cliffside estate she technically no longer owned, but no one had told her that yet. The judge's freeze order had been filed, just delayed in processing. That was intentional. I needed her relaxed. I needed her confident. And I needed witnesses. She stood under a linen-draped arch, all white and wind-kissed, ready to deliver vows she didn't mean. A crowd of 200 watched in choreographed admiration, sipping champagne over a view she never paid for. I arrived not as a guest, not as a father or ex-husband, but as the storm. 2 federal officers walked behind me. Eleanor carried a briefcase. I wore black. No one noticed us until the officiant said, "If anyone has reason why these 2 should not be joined." I stepped forward, not to object, but to deliver. "Ms. Virelli," I said calmly, "you are being served." Every eye turned. Eleanor opened the briefcase. Court papers, full criminal filings, seizure notices, asset forfeiture declarations. The crowd gasped like a chorus. Her fiancé froze mid-step. I handed her the final page personally, a copy of the prenup she'd tried to destroy, and the reinstatement clause that voided her right to everything once she committed fraud against the estate. She mouthed the words, "You wouldn't." I said, "I already did." Fire she built her empire on a hospital bed. He turned the altar into her arraignment. Subscribe now for stories where power doesn't just shift, it erupts. Bell #she lost everything #billionaire payback #courtroom wedding. Within 24 hours, every account bearing her name was frozen. Within 72, she was charged with corporate fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of legal documents. Her fiancé, gone, quietly returned to London. His attorneys issued a press statement. Mr. Wexley was unaware of Ms. Virelli's legal circumstances and has withdrawn from all financial entanglements. She didn't go to jail right away. No, she was forced to live in the penthouse she once stole, alone, stripped of staff, staring at the skyline that no longer recognized her name. The court allowed her to keep her passport, on the condition she remained under observation until the trial. It was a poetic cage, not bars, but emptiness. As for Virelli Tech, I didn't reclaim it. I dismantled it. Sold the patents, donated the infrastructure, transferred leadership to a tech foundation for women in cybersecurity, ironically the one cause she only ever supported when cameras were on. I walked away with nothing in my name but one thing: freedom. Theirs, hers, and mine. She tried to own a future that was never hers, and I gave her exactly what she earned. Subscribe now if you believe revenge isn't rage, it's evidence, timing, and the quiet click of justice falling into place.